resulted in nationalism. So under nationalism, the first point is nationalism resulted out of colonialism. The process of colonialism, it gave birth to nationalism. So what is nationalism? It refers to loyalty and devotion to one's nation. Nationalism refers to we feeling the kind of loyalty, the kind of devotion, the kind of sacrifice we are ready to make for our nation, the kind of oneness we feel when we meet a person of India in some other foreign country is nationalism. So the concept of nationalism developed in India during the pre-independence period, when our country was under the control of Britishers. So the feeling of nationalism, it rose among the people of India when they were becoming constantly dominated and exploited by the Britishers. Okay, when they were trying to fight for freedom and they were being constantly dominated, that is when the unification of India took place. That is when people realized that they should come as one and fight for their nation. That is when they realized the love, the devotion, the loyalty towards their nation, because a foreign power had come and was controlling them. Okay, so the British set up schools which imparted Western education in India. As a result, many Indian middle class got trained in Western education. So this is to say that the Britishers set up many schools in India, English medium schools, the Western education in India. All the Anglo-Indian schools in the hills have been set up by the Britishers. Me myself, I've studied in an Anglo-Indian school, which was once set up by the Britishers. So at that time, many Indian the middle class section of the Indian society, they got trained into Western education. They began to study in the schools set up by the Britishers. They began to study science, politics, all of that in English. So what happened was, it was the Western educated Indian middle class who rose and challenged colonialism. So when the Western educated Indian middle class, they began to study about freedom, about liberty, about sovereignty, democracy, they realized that all of these things are what they are lacking. Okay, in their country they are not being able to be free, they're not being able to experience democracy. So that is when these Western educated Indian middle class, the middle class who went to the school set up by the Britishers, they became one and they began to challenge colonialism. They began to fight against colonialism. So the feeling of nationalism led to rediscovery of traditions. So because of this, the feeling of oneness among the people led to the emergence of all the traditions that they had once began to lose. Okay, so the last point is class and communities. So colonialism paved the way for nationalism. So it is colonialism that gave way to nationalism. Like I told you, nationalism was born or was a result of colonialism. Nationalism, on the other hand, led to the formation of lost class and communities in the Indian society. All the classes, communities that had lost oneness or togetherness due to the coming of the Britishers, due to the intervention, due to the interference of the Britishers, all of that began to come together because of the feeling of nationalism that rose among the people. And the feeling of nationalism rose because of the excessive domination by the Britishers over the Indians. So the Western educated urban middle class were the propagators of nationalism. So the feeling of nationalism, or the people who talked about nationalism, who began to tell people or promote the idea of nationalism, were the Western educated urban middle class, those who went to study in the schools which was set up by the Britishers, right? So they began to bring up issues regarding the freedom of India from the British rule. So these people, they started to talk about being free from the Britishers. Unification of the Indian society occurred due to long-standing domination of the West. So this is to say that due to constant interference of the Britishers, India had lost its unification. But again, because of the constant domination itself, people realized that it is time to come together and fight against the domination, the exploitation they have been facing for over 200 years. Many religious and cultural communities got back together due to the increasing feeling of nationalism. So, the feeling of nationalism, the feeling of oneness, the feeling of loyalty, devotion, love, the we feeling among the people brought together many communities, religious, cultural. It brought them back together. So, the upper middle class and various communities became an important component to pave the way for freedom in India. So, the major and the very important propagators of nationalism were, on the other hand, also the propagators of bringing about freedom in India. These people who are Western educated, all of these people, they tried to create consciousness among the people that they are being dominated by the Britishers and they need to fight against them. Alright, so this is the four basic topics or concepts regarding the first chapter, that is colonialism, nationalism, class and communities. I want all of you all to read the first chapter and try to relate to the PowerPoint that I have presented here, and I have taken points from your textbook itself. I want all of you all to read it. Please remember that. It will be very helpful if you try to relate it with the presentation. Thank you. And before we start our next class, please make sure you read the second chapter as well, so that when I'm teaching, you all can relate better. Thank you. Take care.